Crafty Hope, and welcome. It is time for my mixed media prompt project for week 35 of hashtag Crafty Hope prompts. That is just this project I created for myself starting in October. I start with a full deck of playing cards and started altering them into prompt cards. So I made a list of 156 mixed media inspirational prompts, put them in a jar, and every week on Monday I draw out 3 of those prompts and alter a playing card. So one side has those prompt words on it and the other side is just decorative, just like a playing card. One side's functional, one side's decorative. This is the one I made for week 35 with the prompts tissue paper, embroidery floss, and PearlEx powder. So I will put a link to that video up there, but I have a full playlist of all the other 34 weeks of cards. That's what I do on Monday. On Saturday of each week, today, I do a different project. I like to take those same 3 prompts and do something besides a card just to mix it up. It gives me a little bit of time to marinate between projects, think about these prompts. Y'all, I'll admit, sometimes I make the cards and then I forget about the prompts and then I'm like, oh no, I've got to make something. What did I think of? This week I've thought a little bit at least of different ways I can use these. I asked y'all in Monday's video how you would use the PearlEx powder because it's not something I use very often. So I think I'm going to use some of the suggestions y'all have offered up. But in addition to my cards and my projects, I also like to open this up to y'all. That's why it is hashtag Crafty Hope prompts, so you can use that hashtag and share what you've made, either using the prompts that I draw every week, or I've got that full list of 156 prompts below that you can print out and use them at your will. You can pull them like I do, or go down the list in order, or however you want to do it. I just want you to get inspired and create something. So, yeah. It's time for me to do my project. So I want to tell you what I've made. I also want to tell you that at the end of the project, I will have a full prompt deck that I can use later to pull these prompts. And I don't have to use the 3 that are on here. I can like pull 3 of the cards and use 3 different prompts on there, pick and choose what I think would be fun. However I want to do it. Right now, I'm just experimenting with the prompts, playing with ideas, and enjoying it. I hope you are too. Alright, so what have I pulled out? For tissue paper, where did I put that? I have this, it's some kind of cookie tin, I don't know, I need to zoom out so you can see that, that has most of the tissue paper I have in it. So these are all like decorative tissue papers. I have some plain ones like this kind of craft paper one, and some off-white here, and then there's a package with white and like swirl. So anyway, tons of tissue paper. There's also a thing of crepe paper in here that you could probably use. I picked it up for something, I think to make mushrooms, probably, and it ended up in here. But I didn't think about it before, but you could also use sewing pattern paper. That is a perfect alternative to tissue paper. I use it sometimes to pack things, like, yeah. So I have some sewing tissue paper, so that works great as an alternative to tissue paper. As I suggested, you could also use like napkins or something like that. That's kind of like a thin papery material, deli paper, things like that work great in place of tissue paper. For embroidery floss, I've got that same 10 of different threads and embroidery flosses that I had on Monday, but I've also pulled out this basket that has a lot of my other loose embroidery floss. I have 2 other containers, y'all, of embroidery floss. So many. This is why, I don't know if you saw my announcement for iCAD, I am working on learning new stitches or learning to stitch better, and so all of this embroidery floss will get used into it. There is a loose needle. I need to find a place for that. Okay. Whew, I'm glad I saw that before I put my hand back in there. And then the last thing is PearlEx powder, or mica powders, or pigment powders, or however you want to interpret that. For me, it is the PearlEx powders. I don't even know how many I have. I have all of these plus another bunch over here. So these are with some of my like altering metal type things. So yeah, several of you suggested, because I asked on Monday how you use mica powders, because I think when I bought them, I got them, I'm going to zoom you back in a little bit. Okay, I bought them, I think to use with like polymer clay and that kind of thing. But I don't mess with polymer clay a whole lot. I want to, but I always mess it up because, anyway, I don't use it. So y'all suggested mixing it with like a medium, like a matte medium or something like that, and applying it that way. Yo, that's genius. There were a couple others. I think Dina suggested stamping, putting it on stamps and then spritzing water on it somehow. I'm not quite sure how that works, but I really like the idea of mixing it with a medium and spreading it that way to keep it less fly away. So I'm probably gonna do that. As you can see, I've pulled out a small canvas here, 6x6, remember? Let's see, pull out my handy dandy ruler. Almost 6x6, 6-ish by 6-ish. So it's something I had thought I was going to use for another project, and it was sitting here and I was like, let's go and use it for this one because I really like the idea of using the embroidery floss on this canvas. I believe I have already prepped this with gesso, so it is ready to go. I was going to do something real quick before I got started, and I can't think what it was now. But yeah, we're going to get started on this. I remembered what it was I was going to do, and that was get some clean water. The water on my desk was so gross, so I got that changed. And I'm going to start on this little canvas the same way I start, our journal pages and a lot of my other things is with some collage. I've sped this up quite a bit because it's really just me collaging. I am using an acrylic matte medium. It's just some cheap stuff. I have found that using quite a bit of it works great to get it to work the way I want. And I love the way it looks when it dries. It's just a matter of making sure I use plenty of it. And on a textured surface like this canvas, I definitely needed quite a bit. So I'm putting down different papers, especially thinner kind of ones that I know I can wrap around the edges of this and won't bulk this up too much, because I do know that I do want to do that embroidery part on this at some point. I have no idea what I was going to use for my focal or anything like that. This was all very intuitive, just kind of knowing I had those prompts and I had a general idea of what I wanted to do with the PearlEx powder. So but I'm starting with collage. You can see this is fairly monochromatic. Well, maybe not monochromatic, neutral. I'm using, just kind of browns and blacks and whites. And there is my first application of tissue paper, and I'm using that sewing pattern paper. Now, y'all, I may have sewing pattern paper as one of my other prompts later in this, but it's not a huge deal if I use it here because I'm going to use other different tissue papers on this as well. Now, because this is a canvas and it has those like sides on it that you will be able to see unless this goes in a frame, I'm making sure that I am wrapping that paper around the sides too. I don't know what happened here. Oh, this is some rust dyed coffee filter. So that would be also another great alternative for tissue paper. So I kept thinking of things that were kind of awesome for like that tissue paper prompt. Now, it's great, the tissue paper and the coffee filter and all these things I'm using with that matte medium, because you can still kind of see through them. So it's great. Now, just like my project last week where I used a bunch of mediums to kind of get an encaustic effect, I decided to try just using this like off-whitey clear tissue paper to also do that kind of cloudy encaustic effect as well. It hit me that, yeah, layering down bits of white tissue paper with a matte medium would also give that semi-cloudy encaustic-y feel. It's not as effective as what I did last week with the junk journal page, but it still kind of works. So I've got two big kind of applications of tissue paper on here, and I'm looking at this canvas, and there's a couple I didn't like some of the white spots on here. So over there on that right, the corner and right above it, I'm like, I need something else. So I'm going to start doing, and also in that left corner, I had butted up some of the papers just right to the edge, and I didn't like the harsh line there. I wanted it to kind of ease over the edge. So I'll use this little bit of dictionary paper to kind of help me get that. And like I said, I really like that I can use this wet medium to wrap around the edges. Yeah, and that one, it didn't really matter if it went to the back, so I tore that down. And if you don't have an acrylic matte medium, like if you don't have this one, you can use a fluid matte medium, or white school glue works, or a Mod Podge. All of those kind of things will work in place of that. Just something that's a little more fluid and flowy than like a gel medium or a glue stick to kind of put down these thinner layers and get them to wrap like this. The corners were a bit tricky, especially this one was kind of bulky where it had been wrapped around the wood frame. All right, so I think that's everything. I'm going to try this. Took me a few minutes, make sure I got all the edges, all of that. And now I have some matte gel medium from Liquitex. That is a palette paper from like the Dollar Tree. And I have some of my PearlEx powder. So I'm going to use a palette knife to pull out some of my matte gel. I'll use a separate non-sticky palette knife to scoop out some of that PearlEx powder. I think this color is like antiqued copper or something along those lines. And I did not need near as much, I think, of the powder as I used because it is a pigment. It colored this just fine. So I should have started with a little bit less and worked up to more, but it's fine. You know, it achieved a dark brownish color, which is what I wanted. For some reason, I wanted a brown. I don't know. I guess I was trying to keep in that theme of neutrals. And then I've got this small Tim Holtz stencil. I love the stencil. I think it's called Florals or something like that. I will try to find it. Usually when I look for it, I can only find a larger version of it, I think. I'm not sure, but I'll try to find it. I love this stencil. But I'm using my palette knife and being as careful as Hope can. Hope's not very careful. I'm trying to scrape that over the stencil and get a nice crisp image. So that is looking beautiful, but I wanted it in one more spot, and I was thinking the lower right, but I was like, you know what? I put it in the lower left. I'm going to need to put that in the upper right. But because I wanted to flip the stencil over and reorient it, I'm going to go ahead and clean my stencil with the baby wipe so I can flip it over along with my desk so I don't get that everywhere. And it's going to take me a few minutes of not minutes, but a couple tries to figure out exactly how I want that stencil to be oriented. All right, so now that it's there, I'm going to do the same thing. Use my palette knife to scrape that matte gel with the PearlEx powder over my canvas in a neat area. And I could have done any color, but I thought because this has flowers and leaves, you know, something neutral would be best because it wouldn't have to, I don't know, I wouldn't have to try to make the flowers a certain color and the leaves a certain color. So that was the plan. All right, so I cleaned that. I did take that stencil and my palette knives and all of that and clean them really well before I moved on this. So, and I did let the sit and dry for a minute, but then I heat dried it. And you can see in a couple spots where I smeared some of the wet matte gel with the PearlEx in it on the sides, just to kind of continue that over. I could have stenciled it, but yeah. So that was that's a Stabilo woody and brown that I decided I wanted to kind of age all the edges of this. So I'm making sure I go over those actual edges and then the front edges of it, just using a wet paintbrush to activate that Stabilo woody. So this will eventually get some color on it, y'all, but this is how I'm starting, starting this. I wanted to age this. I think I might have to go back. One of those left edges I don't end up not liking, like right in here. I can end up seeing my finger mark in it, and I don't really dig it, so I might have to go back and fix that. I didn't see it till later, but it's okay. It's a water-soluble pencil. I can do that. All right, so here is some more tissue paper. I went through like all that tissue paper I had and found this image of a hummingbird, and I really like that, and I thought it would go really nicely with the flowers that I've already got going on with the PearlEx powder. So I'm going to cut out the one I want from the edge and then do a slight fussy cutting. I know that I could do that
water technique where I take a wet paintbrush and kind of trace around it and tear, but this felt just as effective, and the tissue paper wanted to tear so much, so I felt a lot more secure about just cutting it. So this, yeah, so I'm going to look at this for a while. This bird has a little bit of color around it and on it, and so to kind of bring that into the canvas, I've pulled out a couple of acrylic inks. These two are Amsterdam. This first one is like a light olive color. I love this color. And of course, I'm going to splatter it. So I've got my fan brush. I'm going to wet it a little bit and then splatter that on my canvas. Now, some of the splatters were a little bit bigger than I'd hoped. I can't really do much about that. They're not going to dry as well as I want. So I dried that between doing this next color because I didn't want those two colors to blend. I was afraid if I put this pinky, what it's called, Naples light red yellow hue or something, if I put that right on the green, then they would blend and make up mud, and I didn't want mud. So all right, so I dried that and I looked, so I'm going to look at this for a little bit and decide that there's not enough of like that brown on here that I wanted. Yeah, I'm looking at that and I'm like, I need something to integrate that brown into here. So I go get, I think this is a Dr. P.H. Martin's one. I'm not positive, but it's Van Dyke Brown is the color. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to splatter it also and then dry. So lots of splattering and drying here. But once I get these brown splatters, they go so perfectly with those brown flowers. I was like, that's what this needed. Because I kept thinking, well, that hummingbird is blue. Maybe I could bring in a blue. But it's not what it needed. It needed the brown. All right, so I'm going to stick down my hummingbird, but I'm using Liquitex Fluid Matte Medium. It is, I don't know, I trust it a little bit more because it is artist grade than the other matte medium that I use. Yeah. So since this was my focal and I don't know, it felt a little more precious. It needed the artist grade stuff. So I'm using that, getting this down. You can see that the edges of the white edges of the hummingbird kind of just disappear on here. So you don't even see the edges. It's fabulous. So I went over that as well with the matte gel. I thought about scraping, but I was really concerned that I might scrape the image off. And granted, I could cut out another one, but this was just fine. So I'll look at it for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and dry it and then come back in with, y'all, this isn't even some of the embroidery flosses I pulled out. These are one of the two boxes I have where my embroidery flosses are organized by color. Because I decided I wanted a blue embroidery floss to kind of match my hummingbird there. So I picked out one I liked and I got it on a needle and knotted. And now I'm going to make some scattering of French knots on this canvas. This is probably one of my favorite parts because the way the canvas is stretched is a lot like working in an embroidery hoop, so it makes that same like popping sound when you go through it the way that an embroidery hoop would. So anyway, I'm making French knots. If you've watched some of my other videos, you know how I do this. You pull your thread up through your substrate, you wrap your thread around the needle several times, and then you put your needle back through in a different spot and pull it back through. Now, a lot of times you want to pull that knot like kind of tight. Watch how I do this when I wrap this. See, this may not be the best example. I'm going to wrap that, and I'm doing 3 times to make a big knot. And then when I get my needle in there, I'm holding the other edge of the thread tight against the needle so that my knot stays kind of tight. So you can kind of watch this. I'm going to wrap. I'm going to put that in there, and I'm holding with my left hand that thread kind of tight as I pull that through so that I don't get a whole lot of tangles. Now, the problem with using a canvas for this is I couldn't get up around like all the edges because the wood backing for the canvas was there. And this one was real close, real close to that edge. So I think I ended up doing something like 7 along the top. And then I'm going to do, I don't even remember how many on the bottom, but I just wanted to bring that blue in a different way. And I think this is the last one on above the hummingbird that I do, because my thread was getting kind of short. So I decided to go ahead and tie it off. I think I'm going to skip ahead. Yeah. And I put some more thread back on my needle, and I'm trying to decide where to put the ones below. So I'm going to do several more of these French knots and then tie this off. And y'all, I think that is it for this project. I really love this piece. It's so simple because it's just, I don't know, I didn't even have to really make the image. It just came straight off of a piece of tissue paper, and I believe that tissue paper came from the dollar store. So it, and then I used a stencil. I don't know. I really am happy with this little canvas piece. Even the canvas, I think, came from like Five Below or something. I'm thrilled with it. I hope you like this too. If you have any questions about my process, about this project, about any of the materials or supplies I used, please don't hesitate to ask. I am happy to help. Alright guys, if you like this, give me a thumbs up. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and come back later and watch. Oh, and y'all, look what I did. I went through this lip of the canvas here. I'm going to have to cut that off. Okay. Anyway, I will see y'all later. I hope you've enjoyed this. I had a great time with this one. Come back Monday and see what our week 36 prompts are going to be. Alright, bye.